Hey folks, and welcome to Typology, the show on which we explore the mystery of the human personality and the great human adventure, all through the lens of the Enneagram. Hey, we've got a great guest for you today. I'm thrilled to be welcoming Dr. Henry Cloud to the show. Henry is a clinical psychologist, leadership expert, and New York Times best-selling author. His books have sold more than 20 million copies worldwide. I'm sure most of you know him from his groundbreaking book, Boundaries, which I told Henry that if his book were an airline, I would definitely be a frequent flyer and be platinum status because of how much the book has impacted me and how many times I've recommended it. If you haven't read the book, you need to read that one. But Henry's influence reaches far beyond that one title. For decades, he's helped leaders, organizations, families, and individuals understand what it takes to grow, change, heal, and move toward the life they were actually made to live. His brand new book does that very thing as well. It's titled Your Desired Future. It's available now. It's just released as of May 5. And in the book, Henry lays out a practical and deeply insightful framework for moving from where we are to where we want to be, not through wishful thinking, but through vision, strategy, accountability, adaptation, and right resources. Here's what makes today especially fun. We talk through Henry's Enneagram type and try to decide exactly what type he is. So we go through that conversation as well, and then we move to his book. You're going to love this conversation. We explore what happens when achievement, possibility, and power all seem to live in the same neighborhood, and how self-awareness helps us become more grounded, more connected, and more free. Hey, that's it for me, Anthony Skinner. And without any further ado, here's the man of the hour, Ian Cron.
Hey, Typology friends, welcome back. And I am thrilled today to have my new friend, Dr. Henry Cloud, on the show. Now, Henry isn't sure if he's a 3, 7, or 8. He thinks he's all three, which actually just classifies you as having multiple personality disorder. But secondly, he's also, in addition to the author of many books, his new book drops today, Your Desired Future, the 5 Essential Steps That Take You Where You Want to Go. Henry, welcome to the show.
It's good to be with you. You know, I was hoping you could tell. You're the expert on the Enneagram. I when you said I say I'm this, I don't say I'm this. That's what the other expert told me I was. So, okay, I'm supposedly equal on 8, 3, and 7, whatever that means.
Yeah, well, we'll unpack that. But first, congratulations on the book drop today.
Oh, thanks. It's been a model I've worked with for a long time. I just never wrote the book. And time came to do it. So I'm pretty excited. Awesome.
Well, we'll get into that in just a minute, but let's, I wanted to start with this question, then we'll jump into some Enneagram stuff. But you and I are roughly the same age. And,
it was hard turning 40 this year, wasn't it?
Yeah, man.
It's so hard.
I know.
My body's, I can feel aches I didn't used to. Mm-hmm. It's hard.
Yeah. I ran 10 miles yesterday and I just couldn't believe how tired I was after it. You know what I'm saying?
I can't believe how tired I am hearing you talk about that.
I guess,
I used to
we're not going to be telling the truth in this episode.
So. Yeah, that's right. There's going to be a lot of lies in this episode. So, but Henry, what's so cool is you and I recently met for the first time in person over lunch with our mutual friend, Mike Hyatt. And first of all, it was a delight. I was disappointed that our conversation was cut short because we were really getting into some cool territory. And what I was thinking about was that you and I were...
It was so fun to talk to somebody. Actually, we got into some depth psychology stuff.
Yeah, and Carl Jung.
A lot of people that live in... particularly your world of, typology kinds of things, that's kind of helpful in where they stay, but they don't understand that comes from somewhere.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. You get down to the operating system underneath all this, and that's down in the weeds where I love to live.
I'm with you on that. And here's my question for you. You and I both trained, I became a psychotherapist, you a clinical psychologist. we trained at roughly the same time. And what I was going to ask you was, back then, there was a kind of skepticism, if not hostility, toward people going into the field of psychology among Christians, right? Like at least where I was. I was at Denver Seminary. Vernon Grounds was kind of a mentor, and but everyone else in that school looked at the psychology department like we were just a bunch of liberal heretics. You know what I mean? Like just crazy people. And I'm just curious.
Secular humanists.
Yes, exactly. And I'm curious, what drew you to being a clinical psychologist? And because it was kind of I don't want to say countercultural, but I kind of, push the envelope kind of thing to do in those days.
It was, and in the early years, especially, when I started writing books, a lot of it was centered around debates. I mean, you had these two sides. You got the people that were Christians who really valued counseling, and you had the other side that was really anti. I mean, it wasn't even like just they thought you were different or weird. They were out to, take us down.
Yeah.
And so it in the early years, and that really helped me because what it forced me to do, I knew the value of therapy from my own life when I hit bottom. And that's really how I got into it. And in fact, I wrote a book about that whole journey called Why I Believe. And why I believe was basically I hit bottom and reached out to God, and he showed up and he took me through a path. And what happened in that, Ian, was I was getting more serious about my faith, and I was in a very, very strong evangelical community that had a lot of good things to it. But in that, there were some prevailing models in the Christian world of how you deal with emotional issues, the people who go to counseling for. One of them was the sin model. There's got to be a sin behind this somewhere. It's kind of like the old Jay Adams nouthetic world. Mm-hmm. And then there was the truth model. Well, you got to know the truth. And if you know the truth will set you free. And you fill your head with, all sorts of, memorized scripture and all. There's truth to all these, but that was kind of how you do everything. Then there's a demon behind every problem, school, and you need deliverance. And then there was the sort of the spiritual burp experience where you go on a retreat and you get into the pain and have inner healing. And what happened was I actually worked for a year before I did my training in a Christian psychiatric hospital. And I just began to see, there's value to all those perspectives. There's spiritual and scriptural truth to all of them. But those models were inadequate. And that sent me on a deeply theological study for a while. And what I discovered was they were sub-biblical in that they didn't really include the whole counsel of God and the processes that he's outlined that actually heal us. And so that just became a life mission for me, was to show how faith and relationship with God and his ways heal us. And that's kind of how I got started in this. And I've never been disappointed by how the good science that psychology validates and studies and proves to be true, how that validates the scriptures. And I've never seen anything come into conflict in those. They're just not.
Yeah.
So I actually loved those debates, and I always saw the debates as theological. They'd want to talk about psychology, and I'd say, "Well, good, let's talk about the Bible. You say this, but here's what the Scripture says. How can you defend that?" And that's the way I went at it.
Right. So, the Enneagram might be positioned. This is a little simplistic, but as a tool that's useful for developing self-knowledge about your interior architecture, right? Now, it's a low definition picture. of these patterns of acting, thinking, and feeling that predictably show up in different people's lives. And, if we can get people to have 10 or 20% more clarity about what's going on inside, or at least open a conversation with them about what's going on inside, I think we're heading in the right direction. And I'm curious to know, what has the journey of cultivating self-knowledge been like for you personally?
Well, beginning with the wake-up call that you don't have any.
Right.
I remember those days.
Yep.
I think in my new book, it opens with a story about my Doberman, Finley. And I talk about I love big working breeds. I've had 5 German Shepherds and a Rottweiler and now a Doberman. And I love them because they're just, first of all, they're so loving and loyal, but they really do their job. And Finley's job is to protect the house. And somebody comes to the front door and she runs and she barks. And this is scary. I mean, we have FedEx guys, tossing stuff on the porch and running. But I've never seen her run to the front door and bark and stop and say to herself, I wonder if that was helpful. Did I bark at the right time? And the bigger question, will that barking get me closer to where I want to be next Thursday? That's resolved or reserved for the human species. We are the only ones that have the capacity to what psychoanalysts always call the observing ego, the I above the I, right, that is able to look at myself, what you referred to, self-knowledge, self-awareness. But what most of us do until we don't is we're just like Finley. We run like we're wired and like we're trained and like we've been modeled to, or in compensatory ways that stay away from our vulnerable, anxious, wounded spots. And we just continue to do life in our own image. And so for me, it began when that didn't work anymore. And I hit bottom. And then, pain is a great teacher. There's R.D. Laing that said, pain is unavoidable, but the only kind of pain that is avoidable, and perhaps some of the worst pain, is the pain that comes from trying to avoid pain. And a lot of times, that's kind of what we're doing in life. We're just trying to stay comfortable where it doesn't hurt or doesn't make me scared or whatever. But that's going to hit a wall. And at some point, our old patterns don't work. So for me, that's what happened. And I reached out to God, and He showed up. And one of the things He also did was He put me in a group. It was actually a Bible study, but it was a very, let's call it just psychologically aware leader who actually taken a lot of counseling courses in seminary. And we did a lot of processing in that group. And also, I had to go into therapy at that point. I was really, really depressed. And so it's interesting, if you look at how humans are constructed all the way back to, mirror neurons, how do we learn about ourselves? Well, self-awareness comes from other awareness of me. And then I become aware of what they're aware of, and that gets mirrored. And that empathic attunement turns into observational capacities inside of our own heads. One of the ways that our pain thresholds are built, you've seen this. A kid falls down, and what do? They look up at mom, and they're, without words, they're going, am I hurt? And if the parent goes, oh, you're fine, get up, get up. But if the parent goes, oh no, what happened? They go, wah, wah. Now I've got that structure inside that's my limit. Mm-hmm. That's where I hurt. And so it really starts, I think, with a setting where you can really be seen, but there's somebody with some pretty good eyes that's seeing you. And we learn about ourselves. It's like the proverb that says, a person's heart is deep waters, deep intentions, but the person of wisdom draws them out. And we know the beginning of that is deep attunement and deep empathy. And that kind of opens up what we need to be aware of. What empathy does, everybody knows this to some degree, but what happens when somebody starts to talk about something and the other person really sees them and hears them and responds that way? You see two things happening. You see the eyes fill up with tears, and you see more come out. That empathic connection leads to a self-awareness, what you, as a Jungian, the shadow emerges. What's in the darkness are the split off parts of ourselves that have been compartmentalized and have locked doors. We become aware by being in some sort of process that can melt and pull up. And that's what happened with me.
That's beautiful.
And the Bible is replete with prescriptions of doing this. Psalm 139, God, search me and know me and see if there's any anxious or hurtful way in me or harmful way, and try my anxious thoughts. Confess your faults to one another so that you may be healed, and bring what is in the darkness into the light. There's the scriptures are, if you look at it from a meta-psychology view, the scriptures are it's a depth psychology model. It's not what we see in a lot of modern popular psychology of just cognitive processes or just experiential or just bodily. It's heart, mind, soul, and strength, as Jesus said.
So what have you learned about yourself recently that surprised you?
I don't know. You got a barf bag? You really wanted me to?
Come on, bring it. You wouldn't be the first time on this show.
That really surprised me. Well, a couple of things. And what I would say, they didn't surprise me in that they weren't new to me. What I'm learning and surprised about was how they show up in ways I didn't know that they showed up. And one of the examples would be and part of this is, I think, a gift and a strength. I've got a pretty good capacity for, let's just call it, diagnostic abilities. I can listen to, back when I was in practice, I could listen to the initial voicemail to set up an appointment, and I could tell you what the next year was going to be like. I diagnose, and not actively, I can almost see it, and I diagnose, and I have a lot of models in there that can help. But I tend to be able to evaluate pretty quickly. And what I've seen a lot of times is, along with my evaluation, can be some judgment and a more critical internal valence towards that than I want. I've really been, and not all that, I'm not a highly critical person, or, I don't scream at people and yell at them and all that too much, but to be able to evaluate without judging, that's a lifelong path, I think. And lately, that's something I've been trying out in a lot of different settings internally, just being aware of it.
You're describing something we talk a lot about on the show, and you mentioned it earlier with the observing eye, right? The observing ego. So we talk a lot about metacognition, the capacity to think about our thinking, the ability to stand back and with a compassionate posture, observe, monitor, and regulate patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving, right? I love it when somebody, I can tell when somebody is doing the hard work of growing in self-awareness when they can answer that question pretty quickly. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh, yeah, this is what I've noticed lately. Because a lot of people, as you mentioned, don't notice at all. Like they're on autopilot and they're just caught like your Doberman Pinscher in these sort of reflexive patterns without any capacity or way of exercising good self-leadership in the moment, right? And that's a real handicap.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
It didn't emerge till probably in the vernacular, emotional intelligence, when that appeared, probably through Goleman's work or others. Analysts have been talking about those functions forever, self and object and all that. But one of the things that the emotional intelligence people talked about was the awareness of self and the awareness of the other. And then you get into the object relationship of how the experience by the other of myself affects the other. And that's where you get into intersubjectivity and all that stuff. And if we're not on some sort of regular kind of practice that is helping us do that, I just think we're always in trouble.
Yeah, I agree. 100%. And as I've said to you over lunch that day, I think the Enneagram gives us really good starter tools, right? At least it gives us a framework to begin to think about these internal patterns, ways of, maybe understanding each type as a story that it tells itself about itself and how it thinks the world works, right? And so you sort of like through a narrative lens, right? And I think that's, so helpful to wake up and realize, wow, I have grown up in this self-constructed story that I put together as a little person. And that story has long determined how I skillfully and not so skillfully move through the world. And how can I more live in the highest expression of myself by living in the true story.
It's such a never-ending story and process too. The other part of that, when you're talking about living in the true story, it's like, okay, so now, we're finding we look through a lens and we interpret things through our narrative. And then you're starting to see things that really are different than that. And at that point, there's the other side of that, which is, oh, crap. I have developed tools that fit my story. But reality out there has both opportunities and demands as well as threats, that because I've been operating with the tools that fit my story, I've got to develop new tools if I'm going to swim in this ocean called reality. And that can be on either side of the fence. Some people, their story has made them so shielded and guarded to trusting anyone. And they built that story in an environment where trusting would have killed them psychically. And now they're in a world where there are actual people that are trustworthy and love is available. And so now they're overcoming their cynicism. You can't trust anybody. Well, maybe they are. But what are you going to do when love shows up? Now you've got to work with those internal tools and patterns and mechanisms to be able to open the door. And then other people have the opposite. I've seen people get severely hurt.
Right.
In adult life because they grew up in such a wonderful, they've never been lied to. They've never been deceived. They've never been bullied. And so they overtrust everybody. And they don't know there's lions and tigers and bears out there, And so sometimes once we find a new external world, it's different than our narrative. Now we got to develop a new toolkit.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I was talking with a leader recently who said, my team is pretty functional. I think it's doing pretty well, but there's also a part of me that thinks that something's off. People are misunderstanding each other. Conversations feel harder than they should. And small things are turning into bigger things. And honestly, friends, that's how it usually starts. It's not with a big breakdown, but with a slow drift. And that's why I created the Enneagram in the workplace. It gives teams a shared language for how they act, think, and feel, how they communicate, how they handle stress, so that you can catch things early before they become costly. And with Memorial Day coming up, it's actually a great time for a reset. Friday through Monday only, you can take $30 off this course, Enneagram in the Workplace, with the code RESET. Just head to ianmorgancron.com/courses to learn more. It might be the very thing that gets your team back in sync. Well, that actually leads well into this conversation around being a 3, 7, or 8. And I'm just...
You're going to have to tell me. I'm not the Enneagram expert.
I know. So I'm just going to ask you...
I'm a little bit more of an expert in the pathology side of the world. If you want to talk about the MMPI, for example.
All right. Well, actually, I'll tell you what I'll do. I will actually tag that on to see if we can... We'll just see where it goes. All right. So let's talk about unconscious motivations. That's probably the quickest way to have this conversation. And you tell me which of these 3 statements sounds more like you, because the Enneagram teaches that you are all 9 types. It's just that one is dominant. So you can't really determine type on the basis of traits. Otherwise, you're going to be utterly confused because you have traits of all 9 types, right? It really comes down to what's the unconscious motivation. So which of these sounds most true to you about you? 1, I have a need to succeed, to appear successful, and avoid failure at all costs. Okay. Now, that's an Enneagram 3 achiever or performer. Our great friend Mike Hyatt would call himself a recovering 3, right? This drive, this need to succeed, to appear successful, and to avoid failure at all costs, right? I could say a lot more about the 3, but let's just stick with that. The 7 is really more... they have a need to avoid pain and suffering or distress. And their way for doing it is by living in this intensely future-oriented world where they're always thinking about the next adventure, the next escapade, the next stimulating idea to toss around, and then planning these escapades and planning everything to stay out of it.
Positive
yes,
escapades?
Very positive. Yeah. It's all about
Not
pleasure.
necessarily challenges.
Right. Although I guess a 7, 7s are brilliant at what's called reframing. It's one of their sort of defense mechanisms, which is when an uncomfortable situation arises, they'll turn it upside down. So and to avoid feeling what you or I would feel if we were in a similar situation, right? And so I'll give you an example of this. Bob Goff. So one time I'm at Bob's house. We're standing behind of it, looking out at this harbor, right? And he looked at me, and he's a classic.
Has Bob Goff ever had a negative thought? I
don't know. Listen to what he said to me. He said, Ian, if I ever saw a shark, I'd just tell myself it was a dolphin with teeth. And I was like, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard, Bob. That's the craziest Enneagram 7 thing I've ever heard. So reframing in a sometimes toxically positive light, something that is just painful, right? So the third one is the 8, the challenger. And the 8 is someone who sees a world that is kind of fundamentally hostile, in which people are either controlled or in control, right? And so they assert strength and control over others and the environment in order to mask vulnerability and weakness in themselves, right? To disavow it both to themselves and to others. Now, do any of those three sound like you?
They all do.
Which one sounds most like you? Like, where would you park? Think of your life as 9 rooms, your house. And there's just one room, you go to all 9 rooms, but there's just one room you tend to sit in more than any other when you read books or just sit.
You know, I don't really, the first one, the sentence she used, I couldn't really identify with, sort of like, did you put the need to
succeed?
Succeed? And
I'd say the other thing is you tend to think maybe in earlier life, like not now, but more think about these questions in the light of like where you were in your 20s.
the part of that I can identify with is the need to go do it.
To make things happen.
Yeah, a little more than the trophy at the end.
Okay.
I got a pretty strong tolerance for pain and persevere when there no trophies appearing. I'll just keep going, because it's something about the process which makes me a little bit identify more with the 8 part of it. What I couldn't quite connect with is the seeing the world as hostile. I think I see it as full of stuff that it's got to be fixed. It's got to be altered. You got to, this is fixable. Let's go fix this. Let's make this better. And I identify with that a little more than it's out to get me, I think.
Okay.
I couldn't identify with the adversarial feeling of that.
Okay. So 8s typically have what we call oppositional energy. So meaning that they go up against things, right? There's a lot of momentum driving forward. They're future oriented like 7s. 3s are also future oriented types.
I identify with the oppositional stuff.
Right. And there's a type of 8 that I wonder if it might apply to you, which is called a social 8. And the social 8 isn't a challenger as much as a protector and a defender. And they are not afraid to go nose to nose with whatever life presents them with. But they do it with a kind of warmth and a kind of kindness that another type of 8 doesn't have, right? That's just the elbow tossing, challenging dude, But so that social 8 is their aggression, if you will, their assertion is in service of life and other people. Does that ring true?
I can identify with it. And also, I mean, to even be oppositional and push people.
Yes. And not afraid to do it.
In a way that I think they need to be pushed.
Right. Yes.
I mean, I just never met a broken person that I don't think can get better.
Right.
Damn it.
Right. Right.
I think we can fix this. Come on, get with the program. Let's go. That's
so there's that forward moving energy and that kind of that drive forward. I just suspect that you're provisionally, right? Because it's really up to you. But I feel like there's a lot of social 8 energy in you that makes you really good at what you do, because you can be both confrontational and caring at the same time. And you're not afraid to be confrontational, to say the hard things, to move boldly into people's lives. You're not afraid to go against the norms to become a psychologist 40 years ago. You're not afraid to, you said something earlier that made me go, that's very 8-ish. I can't remember. They love debates. Love in part.
But I don't love debates for debates. What the debates I love are, it's like these, back then, and you still see it. one of the things that angers me the most, you talk about getting hostile about it, is a lot of representations of God and his ways that's just wrong. And I kind of feel like, in fact, I've said this many times. What I want my work to be about is that, sorry, God's ways heal people, and he's not getting the credit for it a lot of times, because the people that are screaming the big God voice aren't doing his ways. And there are people that maybe don't sound like that, but they're doing the things that he describes that heal people and help people. And you hear people say, I went to church, it didn't help, but I went to therapy and that's where I was healed. But you put a microscope on that therapy and it was God's ways operating in that therapy room, and he's not getting credit for it. And that angers me. And I will fight that fight until I don't have a breath anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, because I have that experience. My last book was on the 12 steps and my experience in recovery. And people always ask me, well, why can't the church be like a recovery room? I see more miracles in the rooms of recovery than I see in church, right? And I'm like, well, there's a reason for that. Like, God shows up there because what you find there is compassion and empathy and truth and open-heartedness and kindness. And frankly, for the church to become more like a 12.
Confession and repentance. What's more but church than that?
Yes.
The moral inventory, the making amends.
Yeah. It's just the gospel in 12 steps, really. And I always tell people, well, the church could be more like an AA meeting, but at first it would have to admit it was an alcoholic.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, Jesus, listen to what he said to that point when he was talking to the Pharisees. He said, you lay heavy burdens on men's shoulders. For the traditions of men, not the oracles of God, you lay heavy burdens on their shoulders, and you do not allow them to enter in, and you do not enter in yourself. You're in denial, and because of your denial, and you are not doing the path of poverty in spirit and brokenness and cleaning the inside of the cup, is in the same chapter of Matthew 23, because you're not doing it yourself, like you said, you're not allowing anybody else to enter in either. And that is, when he said, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, that was the leaven of the Pharisees. Mm-hmm. The Sadducees were the ones that denied the supernatural, but the leaven of the Pharisees is exactly what you're talking about. External, looking good, oriented towards all the, preaching all these platitudes and imposing on everybody else and judging everybody else and not doing it, but never saying, I am broken. Mm-hmm. I need help. I need to go through the steps. And you're exactly right.
Yeah. Well, that's a good lead into talking about your new book. The new book is titled Your Desired Future, the 5 Essential Steps That Take You Where You Want to Go. By the way, thank you for that moment of vulnerability. And also, it was very social 8. This beautiful, forceful, but then revealing of that very tender heart behind a very competent, strong presence. Just for a moment, the heart comes out, and it's just so beautiful to watch in a man when it happens. So thank you for that. So tell me about your desired future, and let's talk about what's in there. We got 5, different sort of, I don't know if it's steps that are involved in securing your desired future. Let's just have at that for a minute.
Oh gosh, how can I make this short? I always, when I approach my world of work and the stuff that I work in, I always try to sit back and ask the question, what's the created order of this? In other words, did God design things to work in a certain way. If you're going to build an airplane, you got to know the laws of physics. That's how he set it up. And what I've seen over and over, a lot of times people very smart, very talented, lots of abilities, try to reach some goal. It could be clinical, it could be relational, it could be business, whatever it is. And they go to work and they don't get there or get there in half measure. And early on, it became very interesting to me. When that happens and you got all those brains and all that talent, what's missing? And so I kind of went at it early on from, did God design a way that things move from here to there, from conception to results? And long story about how this finally emerged, but where I ended up was, if God started a business, what would his model be to get from here to there? And it occurred to me, he did. He had a founder, he put a team together, and he scaled it and went global, multiple outlets. And then I asked, well, what's his model for doing that? And then it dawned on me, what did he call his business? The church is called a body. And so I started to ask the question, how does that apply to this? And you go to the New Testament, and the metaphor of the body and how it works is the model. And so I went to neuroscience and neuroanatomy and physiology and psychology and asked the question, how does this human body that God designed get from here to there? And I'm telling you guys, I was amazed, because what happens when you look at the components and start to factor analyze it, it's all these categories of performance psychology and leadership and all of that. And it basically fell into 5 buckets. The first thing that happens is that the human species has that my Doberman doesn't, is we can look at where we are and say, how's it going? And here's where I am. Wouldn't it be better if I were over there? And think of, in the book I call it a desired future state where I would like to be that I'm not now, and it doesn't exist. Okay, the greatest, and what do we call that? We call it a vision. And when Martin Luther King said, I see a day when a man is judged by the quality of his character and not the color of his skin, that was a future state that didn't exist to large measure. He could imagine something that didn't exist then. That's a vision. And what happens in the brain when we have a clarity of a vision, all of these processes begin. And the book goes into all of, but just the neurology of this, what happens is filters start to be called into action that kind of like, it's sort of like when you want to buy a new car and you decide you want a car and you go out and drive, all of a sudden you're seeing that kind of car appear everywhere. Well, they were there all along. You just didn't have a vision that was starting to filter and focus things. So vision does that for us, and desire begins to activate a lot of systems. But the brain, if I'm here and I want to go there, number 2, the brain ain't going anywhere by itself. I can tell my brain to go over there. It's not going. So the next thing the human brain does is it sends out recruiting emails to the talent that it's going to need to get it there. We don't go anywhere by ourselves. Even the simple thing we were talking about earlier, self-awareness, we need the mirror neurons and attunement of another to do that. So what the brain does says, I'm going to need a couple of legs, a couple of eyes, and it activates those systems. It calls them on board, and it gets them ready to go. And inner ear to balance me, little finger, no, I don't need you for this. It's not called to the party. And now we got the talent that we're going to need to get us there. And then we start to go, well, no, not yet. Number 3, how am I going to get there? What's my strategy? And the brain begins to evaluate the context. Well, I'll call an Uber. No, that doesn't really fit to get across the room. Maybe a scooter. No, I don't need that. What's the best strategy? I think I'm going to walk. All right, now we got this strategy. Instantly, your brain begins to filter out everything that doesn't fit that strategy. You're going to focus on that strategy. And also, it's going to come to the underside of that and develop a plan that tells you the specific actions at what pace, by whom, need to be done to make that strategy happen. And your brain's doing all this without even your awareness. And so then you start to walk. Where you start to walk, what if I see a bird on the window over on that side of the room and I turn and I start to, go, look at that. Your brain has already designed a measurement and accountability system to answer the question, are you doing what you said you were going to do? Well, no, it's measure me and I'm not. Now I've wandered off path. It holds me accountable. And number 5, it quickly fixes what is off. That in anything we do, from getting to here or there, whether it's getting the kids to school on time or building a global enterprise, if we don't have clarity of what we're doing, if we don't have the right talent involved, if we don't have a strategy that turns into a plan, and we don't have some way of measuring and hold ourselves accountable to that plan, and we're not fixing the stuff that we find, that stuff turns into patterns and we're going the wrong way, we're not going to get there. And it's true clinically, it's true relationally, it's true in business. And so what I tried to do was simply, everybody's heard of those categories before, but there are components to each of them that have to work in a certain way. That's what the book's about.
Man, I love that you've done this around, tapping into neuroanatomy, neuroscience, physiology, all these different areas, because obviously I love models. So that excites that part of my brain.
It's like the scripture says, the heavens declare the glory of God. And when you look at the creation and how he designed stuff, Jesus did it all the time. You're a vine and a branch and all of this stuff. It's just his design leads us to incredible realities.
Well, so someone listening to the show today and they're kind of stuck, let's say. And you and I talk to people all the time who are quote unquote stuck. They can see where they want to go, but they sense that something keeps blocking them. What's the one thing you'd want them to walk away and actually do today? If you only had 10 minutes with them, that's all you got. You know what I'm saying?
Well, the very first thing you've got to do is you got to step out or be delivered from, in some way, the guilt and the shame of not getting there. Because if your goal is judging you because you're not there and you feel, I'm a loser, I can't do anything right, all of that, the goal itself has become an adversary. We do not move towards adversaries. So if your goal is judging you and criticizing you for not reaching it yet, you got to fix that first. That's number one. And generally that's done in a relationship. So you got to get somewhere. I mean, like you said about a recovery meeting, people are they're not sober. What do? Well, they've been in the cycle of, I'm a loser. I'll stop. No, I can't stop, all this. But what do they do first? They go connect to a safe relational environment that delivers them from the shame of that. It normalizes struggle. And so you got to do that first, where it's got to become okay to be where you are. And then we're going to get curious about what's the next step. And then I think what I would also say to them, the next step is you've got to have some sort of a path. And that's what I call like a strategy. How am I going to get there? And most times we need some sort of help to enlarge our toolbox because we've tried everything we know. And there's a path to get there. Now, you know this when you're trying to move, when in your practice, if you're trying to move somebody from here to there, you have a path in your head, or you have multiple paths that are available to apply to that. They don't. But that's what we need. We need a road to go on. We need a way to get there. And so if they're just beginning today, I'd say get somewhere that can make it okay to be where you are. And then let's unpack this thing and figure out what's been missing or what's broken. And let's get on a proven path where we're not reinventing the wheel, but somebody knows how to get there. You know, if you're lost, stop and ask for directions.
Yeah, right.
And when the student is ready, a teacher will appear. And a lot of times we got to get ready.
Exactly.
And by the way, God is ready. And I don't know if you're listening to this and you're that person that Ian's talking about, I was there, and he's already knocking every human on the planet. And all you got to do is ask him. Mm-hmm. Ask him to show up. Jesus said, I stand at the door and knock. Just ask. All you got to do is ask. You say, God, I don't even know if you're there. That's what I said. I don't know if you're there, but I need help. And then he showed up. So just start with the ask.
It's so funny you're saying this, because I have a client, not a therapy client, but someone else. And they came to me asking, how do I figure out my life purpose? And I said, well, your purpose isn't something you achieve. It's something that you receive. You know what I mean? Like it's not, we could easily just go on ChatGPT and I could punch in your relevant data, and it would spit out a life manifesto, and it would sound great, but it wouldn't be something that you received out from some source outside of yourself, right? And that's when it's going to be meaningful. Now, this is not a person, by the way, who identifies at all as a person of faith, right? And so I've just said to him, would you just be willing to believe that there is a power greater than you that has your best interest in mind and has a purpose for your life? And he's like, well, I don't know. And he has all these objections. I'm like, well, what if could you just be open to that idea? And he's like, sure, I can be open to that idea. I said, great. So here's what I want you to do. Every day until we meet again, I just want you to have a conversation with whatever that power is, he, she, it. I don't care what you call it, okay? We're just going to start there, right? And he's like, oh, okay. So I get a text from him at some point. He goes, it's the craziest thing. I've been every day just saying thank you. And I'm like, awesome. Next assignment, just every opportunity you get, talk to that thing, it, reality, spirit of the universe, whatever you call it. And my whole idea is, I try not to have an evangelical or evangelistic agenda, right? Because but in the back of my mind, I'm like, I got to begin where this guy lives, right? Like and also because I do believe that God, for the earnest seeker, can show up. You know what I mean? Like you got to start the conversation somewhere. You can't always jump from 1 to 20 in a heartbeat.
Well, he said that, seek and you will find.
Exactly.
Ask and, knock and the doors be open.
Yep. So it's just a fascinating conversation I'm in, and I love this guy to death. I mean, he's just so great, but he's struggling to find out what it's all about. And I'm so glad there are people like you in the world that are helping people who are struggling to figure it out. And so thank you for that. Thank you for this new book. I think you're a social 8, but I can't tell you for sure. I'll send you a link to my very scientifically validated test that I spent a lot of money having a research psychologist and their team do. A real psychometrician, I might add.
I'd love to know, because people always ask me. I go, I don't know. They tell me I'm 3 of them. Yeah,
you don't strike. I'll just be honest and say you don't strike me 3 or 7, but you do have a lot of 8 qualities, social 8 qualities, and that's a gorgeous type. And I hope, because we live around the corner from each other, that we will have coffee at Mama Bread someday soon, and pick up our conversation where it ended the last time.
I would love it. I would love it. So just, get your dog to bark at my dog and we'll set it up.
All right, man. Well, listen, everybody, please go out and take a look at and buy Henry's new book. It is a book that will, bring you an incredible wisdom about how to get from here to there in a framework that is really interesting, and it's really intriguing to me. Again, the name of the book is Your Desired Future, the 5 Essential Steps That Take You Where You Want to Go. You can find out about Henry I think it's drhenrycloud.com. Is that right?
No, it's just drcloud.com.
Oh, wow. We got that, did we? And then we also, is that the same on your socials?
No, on Instagram, it's Dr. Henry Cloud Official.
Awesome. All right. Anthony, I love being with you today.
Great to be with you both. Thanks for being with us, Dr. Cloud.
You too, Anthony. Love that hat, by the way.
Thank you. Well, we can get together on that.
Everybody who, if you're listening, may you have love, may you have joy, may you have peace, may you have healing, and may you have rest. Until next time. See you later.